The following is a Thunderbolt West Media presentation.
This is a call to action. Please help us spread the word.
Hi, I'm Jim Calhoun. We're trying something different on our podcast this time, and I really want you folks to pay attention. We're calling this show a call to action. And as an American citizen and as a patriot, I don't see how this issue could be swept under the rug like it has been. It really bothers me. And so what I'm going to ask each one of you to do is watch this entire podcast, please. It's going to be very interesting and most of all informative. We're just going to give you facts, and we want you to put yourself in the minds of some of the survivors' families, the families that need closure. We're all American citizens here. We need to stand up for each other. And so I'm going to ask you, please, watch the entire podcast, and as the call to action, share it. Talk about it. Put it on Facebook. Put it on YouTube. I don't care how many times you share this. I don't even need any credit on this. Let's get this job done that we're going to do. And I have two gentlemen here that I'm going to introduce. We're going to start with Larry. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, and they're going to tell us what this podcast is going to be all about. Larry?
Hi, I'm Larry Webb from Cedar Falls, Iowa, and on June 3rd, 1969, night maneuvers, lights out operation, a collision happened between USS Frankie Evans and HMAS Melbourne, and my best friend from the Navy happened to be one of the casualties, and he was the only body they found, the only sailor they found. There were 74 lost. And his name is Kenneth Glines, and he's buried at Independence, Missouri. And one of the survivors that night from the collision is here, Bob Mason.
My name is Bob Mason. I'm from Mishawaka, Indiana. The first tour of duty after leaving boot camp was the Frankie Evans in Long Beach, California. I was on it from December until June 3rd. I happen to be one of the survivors, which I feel very fortunate. During the maneuvers, as Larry had mentioned earlier, we got hit amidships, and a little quick visual after everybody kind of got done rolling around on the decks. We were supposed to go to our general quarters stations, which mine was the forward engine room. So I left the berthing compartment and headed forward, only to find out about halfway there was no ship. So I returned to the fantail where they'd all mustered and found out that the aircraft carrier was still alongside of us, which actually, after they made sure that we didn't go down, dropped the rope ladders off to the side, and we climbed on board, and that's when they took a head count, finding out that 74 of our shipmates did not make the ladder. So we're trying to get those names on the memorial wall for several years now, and hopefully with enough help from you folks out there that this issue will be resolved.
The Frankie Evans was decorated not only in World War II in Korea, but also in the Vietnam War. And my question to all of you folks is why aren't the names of these sailors on the wall that died in 1969 serving their country? So please keep watching, and we're going to give you the facts.
In a few minutes, we're going to talk FaceTime to Steve Krause from California, who is also a survivor that night. And Steve is the president of USS Frank E. Evans Association. And Steve will bring us up to date on legislation and some of the facts about the accident that night.
Now, the picture you're seeing on the screen, the center ship, that is what's left of the Frankie Evans, and the front half is gone. That's the back half of the ship, and you see the whaleboats out there. They're searching for survivors, and that picture, not sure which ship it was taken off of, but that's a real eerie picture of what happened shortly after the collision. And just to give you in a nutshell what we're talking about a ship that was named after a United States military leader in France in World War I, and to honor him. And it was built in late World War II. It was commissioned, it saw service in World War II. And It saw service in Korea, and it saw service in Vietnam. It's a highly decorated boat, and there's so many awards. And I'm gonna tell everyone, go onto Wikipedia and look at the awards that this ship won. All sorts of merits, all sorts of service medals. And so this ship saw heavy action. It was shelled by shore batteries in the Korean War. It took fire many times. It fought against the Japanese airplanes, and it also helped to liberate American prisoners of war after World War II. And so we're not talking about some backwater ship. We're talking about a ship that served very honorably. And also Frankie Evans served very honorably in World War I. And I think to honor his name, I think that this needs to be resolved for everybody. There's a lot of families involved, a lot of American families.
Earlier you seen the picture of the aftermath of the Evans sitting out. This is the Wilburn, that front half of their bow, which took out the flight deck. And needless to say, it was out of service at this point as well. One of the Evans sailors actually landed from the bridge onto the deck of the Wilburn and was severely injured. It's still kind of a eerie looking feel at this point, so it just kind of gives you an idea how massive this accident was in order to cut a ship in half.
Earlier, I said that we'd be talking to Steve Krause, president of USS Frankie Evans Association, and Steve was also a survivor that night. So at this time, I'd like to present Steve Krause, president of USS Frankie Evans Association.
Thank you, Larry. I understand that a lot of people have mixed emotions about the crew of the Frankie Evans and what occurred. So I'd like to provide the audience a little bit of background about Frankie Evans. It was a World War II destroyer, served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And in Vietnam, actually 3 tours. The ship was kept in commission to serve specifically into the Vietnam era. It trained specifically. The crew were volunteers who signed up to be in the military. They were not drafted into the military, and had a clear understanding as to what they were to do in service to our country over there. So the fate of that collision is premised by a lot of different factors. I think people need to understand that the Vietnam War, as simple as it may have seemed, was a complex thing that actually started to develop clear back in the 50s. And in fact, if you try to survey when was the Vietnam War, you'll get numbers from 1954, but everybody is pretty clear it was 1974 was the end. So in between that, a lot of things happened. And the ship deployed in March to go over and knew specifically that this wasn't a Polynesian cruise to go to exotic ports. It was to go and to work specifically off the coast of Vietnam in support of gunfire, sometimes with carriers, and it could be Northern SAR to go up and search in case that there was a down pilot. So there was a variety of things that Evans was tailored to do on this deployment. And its first deployment was May the 5th through May the 17th, right off of Da Nang, and it was to support a invasion of a landing of a Marine force. And in doing so, Evans provided over 5,000 rounds of artillery support. And for those that aren't aware, 5,000 rounds is a lot of shooting. And in doing that, Evans, along with other ships, received a meritorious Navy commendation for that. Evans was then slated to go replenishment, rearm, and return to Vietnam, but was called off to go to a CETO operation. Now, CETO stands for the Southeastern Treaty Organization. It was combined of 7 nations, and actually it was formed in 1954 to support the aggression of, or to be an anti-support for any aggressions to communism. And things in South Vietnam were dicey in the 50s, and of course came to their highlight in 1964 when one of our ships was actually attacked by patrol boats. Given that, CETO, which is actually directed by the Department of Defense, was formed, and they did this training organization where these nations would serve. We did that, and it was supposed to be a 10-day exercise, and it was a war game. But what makes this one really unique was the fact that where it was conducted in a parallel path to the coast of Vietnam between the Spratly Islands clear down south. And a lot of documents, a lot of background information supports that participants in this CETO operation also needed to be on call at any time to support any kind of an outbreak in Vietnam or requests from the South Vietnamese for support. So given all of that and that background information, it should be clear to the listeners that the reason Evans was there was to support the war in Vietnam, and simply that is the case. And so we'll kind of fast forward a little bit and let the listeners think about what it would look like on a dark night, no lights, moonlights only coming out in between some clouds, and a glass-like sea, and numbers of ships all traveling in the same directions, but performing their jobs to protect aircraft carrier. And that's what Evans was doing on the evening of 3 June 1969. They were in a small task force with 5 other destroyers and the Australian aircraft HMAS Melbourne. At approximately 3 in the morning, Melbourne signaled for Frankie Evans to assume the plane guard position. Now, that was unexpected because the night orders really did not call for Evans to be the plane guard ship, but they were prepared to go ahead and react. The officer of the deck and the junior officer of the deck initiated a series of turns to come to that position. And in doing so, initiated a collision course with Melbourne that after a series of small events became devastating to a collision. The collision itself cut the ship into 2 pieces, and as my wife always reminds me, hey, so you can visualize it, it's like a semi-truck running over a Volkswagen. And in doing that, the forward section of the ship sank within about 2 minutes, and taking with it 74. There was only 1 body that was recovered from the collision. So what's happened since then, and we can kind of fast forward, and there's a lot of stories, and a lot of good men remember some very sad events of that night. But everyone basically kind of went on with their lives. I mean, they were reassigned and they got out of the Navy. And let's now fast forward with people going, their own ways, establishing their families, having their children, doing their careers, And it isn't until about 1985, picture one of the mothers and fathers and two children going to Washington, D.C. To go to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall and looking for their son's name. And after hours, they're unable to find his name. And they asked National Park Survey, and they looked through the registry and still couldn't find the name. Finally, they gave up, and when they did get back home, they contacted their congressman and said, you know, how come our son Thomas is not on that wall? Well, this is the first time that congressional leaders are becoming familiar with the wall and how it was designated to be recognizing people. So for about the next 10 years, we get independent actions by relatives of the lost looking for their sons. And you can see that the same scenario occurs over and over. And they receive all kinds of reasons, and a lot of them have nothing to do with what really occurred. For about the first 5 or 6 years, they didn't even know who was responsible for the wall. Did it come from the Department of the Navy, or was it oversaw by the Department of Defense or National Parks or the Department of the Interior? There really wasn't much ownership for it. About this time, the Frankie Evans Association forms. And of course, we start hearing these stories and realize, hey, those names are not on the wall, and why? So in 2003, we actually formulate an association objective to get the names on the wall, and started by producing a series of Senate and House bills, and to date there's been 6 of them. And then we've done 3, which are called National Defense Authorization Act amendments, and all of these have died in committee and or been scratched at the final when the final bills went for signature. Along the way, we've also accumulated 4 major groups that have put in resolutions to support this. We've done petitions, and we've tried to use every avenue we can for our government to realize that there's been a huge injustice here. Now, currently, I want to call your attention to Senate Bill. It's S849, and that Senate bill was introduced by Congressman Kramer in March of 2019 to the Senate, and 3 months later he introduced it into committee. And in committee it has sat there until this date, and it's still sitting there. It does, however, have 19 co-sponsors, which is the most that we've ever had. And daily we are trying to get senators from other states who have not signed on to get engaged with this and learn about, the Frankie Evans. So that is our hope right now, is that we could get a large enough numbers of senators that it will be forced out of committee and brought up for vote. And so, any listener out there wants to know what they could do, they could look up, and it's real easy. If you just Google S849 and it says, the USS Frankie Evans on it, look and see if your senator has co-sponsored. If it hasn't, send them a letter and say, this is an imperative thing that we need to right this justice. And if they want the key points to say is basically, don't let the Department of Defense establish that an arbitrary line drawn in the water should be the means to not honor a fallen soldier that died in defense of their country in Vietnam. Now, that's a quick summary. There are a lot of stories that go, along with this, and a lot of things. There have been two key people in our government that have helped support this, Congressman Adam Schiff from California and Senator Schumer from New York. And they continually take a look at the legislative side and what they can do, to force that through. Now, from the association side, there is a recognition committee that's working on other alternatives to get the public engaged in this endeavor too. And I thank you for allowing me to talk about this, because this is one of the media ways that we can get our information out there. We are in the process of having an intern come about doing some of our external communications and helping with our communications plans, because I have to admit, my age and everything, some of this electronic stuff is kind of beyond my capabilities and many of our members. We have difficulties in setting up things that can be instantaneously put out there. So that's a key thing. We're also going to start doing some visible memorial ceremonies in the DC area, so that we can get the attention of the media around town. And we're going to probably, we're not sure yet, but in 2021 we might hold our reunion in Washington, DC. So that's about where we are with this today. And when the Department of Defense keeps falling back on the key factor that you weren't in the combat zone when the thing occurred, can't accept that, because there are people that are on the wall that actually do not meet their own criteria. So they're trying to force ours as being not viable for the wall, because, and it's been quoted to us that there's over 500 other cases of groups that say they should be on the wall. And our response to that is, then they need to present their case. We've presented ours, and it certainly is something that the people should listen to. Huge injustice. 74 people died for the country, and they died in the Vietnam War. Thank you.
How could a ship that has awarded service medals and so forth from Vietnam War and had 3 active tours, how in the world could they not be considered Vietnam vets? That is just absolutely boggles me.
Well, it's a real good question, and we actually kind of were led down the path. We never provided the information that hey, we knew that some of the people that were killed really had not participated in Operation Daring Rebel. That was where we did artillery support with over 5,000 rounds. So in 2016, early in 2016, we presented our case again through Congressman Schiff and asked the Department of Defense to relook at everything. Well, in doing that, they pulled up everybody's record that was on the ship and did the review. Now, they said they did an extremely thorough review. Fact is, they did not. And we called their attention to it immediately. There was errors in their report. We don't know who's doing these. We don't even know if this is a clerk somewhere who's sitting in some back room that just keeps getting this assignment, pulls out these old documents and goes through it. We don't know at what levels this has really been, escalated to in reviews. But the Vietnam Service Medal was one of the things that we used as an argument as early as 2012, that, you know, they keep turning this down, but if you check and see, you're going to find that the ships in the squadron and Frankie Evans had received Vietnam service credit, and it was for June the 2nd, but it was a typo. It said January 2nd on the report, and we all knew, and the DOD remitted that was a typo, but after the review, then they probably realized, oh, wait a second, that couldn't be right because they weren't in the combat zone. So they took away those credits. They did that in 2017. They did it without notifying anyone. It was one of those things that was online. Now you see it, now you don't. And we immediately started to find out, ask the questions: who gave the order to make the change? Who did the changes? Why were the changes done? We have never received an answer for that. But we know that they probably caught the air looking at the January misprint, and with that they made the corrections. What they did again wrong, though, was relisted the credits, and in looking at it, one of the destroyers that with us is Larson's. They still show them getting Vietnam service credits for May 30 and 31st, which is another error. And in our anger, we called their attention to, if you did such a thorough review, how come there's still screw-ups? And in addition, they had indicated that 17 people had never been in the defined combat zone, and that was incorrect too. So that's when we were prompted as an association to start, now we're going to challenge the report. And the latest report that was done by Robert Works, and he is the Deputy Secretary of Defense. He's the number 2 guy. Now, he's just signing the report. We don't know who prepared the report. But in the report, he's trying to get us off their backs. And he makes an offer that says, hey, we recognize you're in the combat zone, but we want to kind of reserve a special place for you in the Vietnam Education Center that's to be erected right behind the wall. It's an education, it's going to be strictly, and you can have panels and about the story of the collision, and a panel of the lost names. And at first it sounded, appealing, but after you give it some thought, they were basically just throwing us a bone to get us. And we belonged in that education center regardless if the collision had ever occurred or not. We were a participant in the Vietnam War. We were part of the Vietnam War. We were part of the story of the Vietnam War. So, we very, said, nah, we're still going to pursue this. Well, as the story goes, last year, the new president of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund and takes over. And one of the things he does is coming in as he asks for an audit because he was assuming the position of Jan Scruggs, who had been in there since its conception. And in doing so, they determined that there was a huge mismanagement of the funding for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund - Vietnam Education Center, and that it was scratched and they were no longer going to build it. And I would hate to think if we would have said, yeah, we'll take that and just settle for that, today we would be sitting with no education center and a concession that we should have never made. When they took away those medals, I viewed it as a retaliatory action. Oh, geez, we found this out, it was a mistake, so we're just going to take this away. The reason that it's retaliatory is They didn't announce it to anybody, they just did it, hoping, okay, we can get away from this. So let's take a look at the ships that were there and the carrier Kearsarge. There's probably nobody on board that ship that knows, hey, by the way, you had medal credits for Vietnam service, but they were taken away. So if you're wearing an extra star because you thought, well, you got them for that period of time while you were on CETO, you didn't get them, they were taken away. So there's thousands of people that are thinking, hey, I got credit, in May and June for being there. Now, most of the other ships probably don't care because they all returned to Vietnam anyhow, and they accumulated, the credits, later in the year. So to them, that probably doesn't mean much. To the people on the Frankie Evans, that's another slap in the face, to every sailor that was on there. And but I keep going back to Robert's, Robert Works his letter, and when you announce that you're doing what's called a de novo investigation, I mean, it is like the highest level thorough that you can do, and they make those kinds of mistakes and then turn around. Today we still have some of the survivors that have recently got their DD-214s and service records updated, and guess what? Service credit's still there, still shows there, but the Department of the Navy now has taken them away. Another thing that they did was, this was all online at one time. You could look it up, do a little search, and you'd get into the Department of Navy's website, and you go down in the bowels a little bit and look, and then finally you'd find the listing of every medal for every ship and every date. Well, they no longer post those even on their site anymore. They've been completely taken off, probably because an issue like this has brought up so much ill fate to them that they'd have to have hundreds of people working on it all the time. So now you can't even get in and see it and find that information anymore. But, they know, but we keep using it. We have, records of that and screenshots of that and the dates and all of that.
Well, the easy solution is just to go ahead and get it done. I mean, it looks like they're spending more money and more time and more effort dodging their responsibilities, and if they would just buckle down and do it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, we understand, we have to, we've been more than reasonable. We've heard every excuse in the book, and one of the things, and I'll take some responsibilities, we've kind of chased the rabbit down the hole too many times, and they send us off in a misdirection, talking about space, not being adequate space on the wall, and then, oh, hey, the space isn't wide enough for their whole names, and hey, we can't group them together because there's not enough space. So we made those concessions clear back in about 2011, and we said, oh, we totally understand that. They won't be in sequence, they'll be scattered on the wall, but their names will be on the wall. We only ask that the Sage brothers be grouped together if there's three any place. We know they won't be in the dates that they went, and if some of the names are just too long, just abbreviate, the first name, put the last name on. So they have those concessions with that, but now some of the latest things as well, if we do this, now there's going to be other groups, and pretty soon we might, I've even heard, and this is recent, we might have to tear the whole wall down and redo it because, that's ludicrous.
Yeah,
to do something as silly as that. And that tells me, that somebody is just trying to continue to blow this off. If we delay this long enough, this will go away. And, we keep telling them, no, this isn't going away, In fact, you're starting to really get us pissed off. And we've been, we're a pretty good group, pretty reasonable. We'll listen to people, but at a certain point, we're going to have to take action. We've considered a request for congressional review, which is, it's big time when you do something like that. That means you're going to have to get a strong sense of Congress that says, yeah, this is worth going into. And, with something like that, the heads will roll, all that kind of stuff. So, we're still trying to be reasonable. In 2003, let's say about 2005, they would have said, okay, we're going to do it, and have done it. Nobody had known, nonetheless, everywhere there would have been a lot of happy people that is the millions of people in the country. How many people would know? A handful of people, nobody else had known, we'd be going down the road. Now, we're going to play the tune that everybody's going to know.
Yes.
And it becomes embarrassing, and now it's going to be really embarrassing for those people that turned a blind eye on this.
Well,
And for your people that are that live in the state of Nebraska, your former Senator Chuck Hagel, because he made a promise to Eunice Sage that he would make this happen. And when he was the Secretary of Defense and we called him up and said, hey, this is the time to do this, he wouldn't even meet with Congressman Schiff to talk about it. He just said, the next secretary will handle this. And this is after he'd been dismissed from his job. So it's politics. These guys will say and do whatever they can at the particular time, and they're never held accountable for it.
Well, you started this organization in 2003. Here we sit in 2020, 17 years. I'd say you've been very patient.
Yes.
And more than reasonable. I agree with you. Get the word out. And, I hate to say shame them into doing something. We shouldn't have to do that. We should just be able to ask them. They should look at it. It's cut and dried. The opposition to this is just, like I say, mind-boggling. But I really appreciate all the hard work that sounds like you guys have just been hammering. And just got to keep it up. It's got to have.
Well, it's Washington D.C. Is a good old boy network. Now, people that don't even think it or believe it, from somebody who's out here in California that's as far as away from the political scene as possible. In the last number of years, I've tried to figure out how does this really work. I saw it firsthand this year when our amendment in the NDAA, it walked itself into there in about July, and it went through committee, and it went through review, and it passed all the way through. Now, previous years it didn't, and all the way to the final clear in December, and it wasn't until like a week before the vote for the NDAA did it get scratched. So we wanted to know, okay, who did it? Now's the time to figure out who did it. And the feedback we got was the two people that head up the Armed Services Committee was Jack Reed and Inhofe from Oklahoma, Reed from Rhode Island. They were both against it. Jack Reed had even been in a meeting with Ann White. She had lost her brother on the ship. And all he could say was, well, it was outside the combat zone. So we immediately found out, okay, if he was involved in getting this thing pulled, then, we're going to find out why. And so we started asking questions. And now his staff is in contact with Ann White and asked for more information. They kind of said, well, we might not have had all the information at the time. And, surprisingly, they're just going by, what their buddies are telling them back there in the Pentagon. And these guys all served with other people and they know each other. It's a club. And they do favors and things like that for each other. So, well, we kind of did the state of Rhode Island. We were looking at Rhode Island for 2021. We were actually considering going there. We'd already done our preliminary, and I had to notify the Convention Visitors Bureau that we would not be coming to the state of Rhode Island because of Jack Reed. Hey, call him up and ask him, why aren't we coming? Because you're not a veteran favorite state. And they got back to me and said, we understand your position, and we're so sorry. And I, sent them back and said, I'm letting all of our military networks know, don't go to Rhode Island. Jack Reed is not. So you're right. You have to shame him eventually. Well, I think in closing, I'd like to, recap that 74 guys left their families and their friends and their wives, and they went to serve in a war. And they knew that there was a risk with that. And you train and you hope that you will come home, and the majority all do. But for those that don't return, they need to be honored in a special way. And drawing an arbitrary line and says, well, you were just over the line, so you don't count, is wrong. And I don't care if there's thousands of others that were in the Philippines and they died. They were there to support that war. You were in the military and you were there to serve your country wherever and whenever it was requested. And if you get killed, and maybe it's just in a car accident, you still died in support of your country. As long as you were still within that military boundary of being, active duty, you should be honored in every way possible. And for these guys, they should be on the wall with their fellow soldiers, no matter what. Thank you.
And I agree. With everything you said. Thank you, Steve. We appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed getting educated here. As an American citizen, I think we all need to educate. We all need to become educators at this point in time. And it sounds like we need to educate our lawmakers, educate our senators, educate our congressmen, our governors. Everyone needs to know about this. So I ask again, please share this with everyone you know, because all it's going to take is one person, and that's the right person that can actually make this happen. And what we're seeing a bunch of families and a bunch of men that serve their country very honorably. They want a dream to come true, and their dream is so simple. They just want their names included on a memorial. And it's time it happened.
I want to thank everybody for viewing this, hopefully through the whole filming of it, and hopefully something gets resolved, because like had been mentioned before, the survivors are getting fewer numbered as the years pass, and so are some of the family members of the lost 74. Hopefully the ones that are still around at the time will have an opportunity to go visit the wall and see their names presented on that thing, and finally have closure after all this time.
In conclusion, I would like to thank the band, the Calhouns, Jim and Melanie, for doing this podcast. They embraced it from when they first heard about it, when we told them about it, and we can't thank you enough for doing this. And I speak for the USS Frankie Evans family when I say thank you very much, and there's no words to thank you enough for what you've done. So we appreciate this and hope that this makes a difference in getting the names of the lost 74 on the Vietnam Memorial where they rightfully belong. Thank you for watching this podcast.
We ask all the listeners for your support, contact people, and we ask for your prayers. We need all the support we can get. So thank you for listening. Let's make this happen for these guys. As an American, I'm going to challenge all Americans out there. Let's make this happen, okay? Thank you.